There are moments in television history that get quietly erased, not because they were bad, not because they failed, but because they were too honest, too raw, and too uncomfortable for the people holding the purse strings. The episode we're talking about today was one of those moments. It was written, produced, filmed, and finished. The cast showed up. The crew did their jobs. The jokes landed in the room. And then, without a single public announcement, without so much as a press release, it vanished. Pulled from the schedule. Locked away. Left out of reruns, DVD collections, and streaming catalogs for years. But here's the thing about a story that's too good to stay buried. It never really disappears. It waits. And after more than 3 decades, the wait is finally over. This is the full story of the most infamous banned episode in Married with Children history, why it got pulled, what it was actually about, and why it's finally coming back in 2025. To truly understand why this episode caused the kind of panic it did inside Fox's executive offices, you have to understand the world that Married with Children was born into. When the show premiered in April of 1987, American primetime television was a very specific, very controlled landscape. The dominant family sitcoms of that era, shows like The Cosby Show, Family Ties, and Growing Pains, presented American family life as warm, functional, and ultimately reassuring. Parents were wise. Children learned lessons. Problems were resolved by the final commercial break. There was a kind of unspoken agreement between television networks and their audiences that the family sitcom was supposed to be aspirational. It was supposed to show you the family you wished you had, not the one you actually lived with. Married with Children walked into that landscape and immediately set it on fire. Al Bundy was not a wise and loving father dispensing wisdom from a comfortable armchair. He was a man defeated by life, a former high school football star, reduced to fitting shoes onto the sweaty feet of strangers for a living, coming home every night to a wife who hadn't cooked dinner in years, and a house that was perpetually on the edge of financial collapse. Peg Bundy wasn't the nurturing matriarch. She was sharp-tongued, unapologetically self-interested, and completely unbothered by the chaos around her. Their daughter Kelly was written as cheerfully dim. Their son Bud was scheming and socially desperate. And none of them were particularly kind to each other. It was, in every sense, the anti-sitcom, and audiences absolutely loved it. The show connected with a particular segment of American viewers who had never really seen themselves reflected in the idealized television families that dominated the airwaves. Working-class frustration, the quiet humiliation of financial struggle, the tension inside a marriage that has long since lost its romance, these were things millions of people understood from the inside, and Married with Children was the first show to treat those experiences as legitimate comedic territory rather than something to be tidied up and resolved. It was blunt. It was frequently crude. It was, by design, deeply uncomfortable. And it was enormously successful because of all of those things, not in spite of them. But success on those terms comes with enemies. From almost the moment the show aired, it attracted criticism from religious organizations, parent groups, and cultural commentators who believed it was doing genuine damage to American values. Television watchdog organizations began monitoring the show closely. Advertisers received complaint letters. The network found itself in the unusual position of defending a show that was making it a lot of money while simultaneously making a lot of powerful people very angry. Fox was still a young network in the late 1980s. It had launched only in 1986, and it was walking a genuinely difficult tightrope. Its brand depended on being edgy and different. Its survival depended on advertising revenue. And those two things were about to come into direct conflict in a way that no one inside the network was fully prepared for. The episode at the center of this story is called I'll See You in Court, and it was produced during the show's 3rd season, intended to air in 1989. On the surface, it looked like a fairly standard Married with Children episode. Al and Peg, in an attempt to inject some excitement into their thoroughly exhausted marriage, decide to check into a cheap motel for a night away from the Bundy house. What they don't know, what no one tells them, is that the motel has hidden cameras installed in the rooms. Their private evening together is recorded without their knowledge or consent. When they eventually discover what happened, they do what any outraged American couple would do. They decide to sue. The courtroom portion of the episode is where things get complicated, both comedically and in terms of what Fox's executives were willing to put on the air. Al and Peg arrive in court, ready to fight for their dignity, only to discover that their neighbors, Steve and Marcy Rhodes, were guests at the same motel and were similarly recorded. What follows is a series of courtroom scenes in which both couples are forced to give testimony about their private, intimate moments, leading to the kind of deeply awkward, deeply specific humiliation that the show had always excelled at mining for comedy. The jokes were crude, the situations were embarrassing, and the overall tone was completely consistent with everything Married with Children had done before. That's the part that confused the cast and writers for years afterward. By the standards of what the show had already put on the air, I'll See You in Court wasn't an outlier. It wasn't significantly more graphic than dozens of episodes that had already aired without any particular controversy. Al Bundy had delivered monologues about subjects far more explicitly inappropriate. Peg had made jokes that pushed well beyond anything in this episode. Kelly's storylines had frequently used her as an object of sexual humor in ways that the episode in question simply didn't. The writers had been through the network's approval process in the normal way, and the script had not raised any significant red flags during pre-production. By every internal measure, this was just another episode. And yet, something about the subject matter, specifically the combination of hidden cameras, non-consensual recording, intimate footage, and the question of what happened to that footage afterward, hit a nerve that went beyond the usual comedic provocations the show trafficked in. It wasn't just that the jokes were raunchy. It was that the premise of the episode was built around something that felt genuinely disturbing when you looked at it straight on. Two couples, filmed without their knowledge during private intimate moments, seeking justice through a legal system that turned their violation into a spectacle. Even wrapped in slapstick and delivered by characters the audience had come to find endearing, there was something underneath that material that didn't quite laugh off as easily as a fat joke or a marriage complaint. But the episode's content, complicated as it was, might not have been enough on its own to get it pulled. The real catalyst was something happening outside the studio walls entirely. In early 1989, a Michigan woman named Terry Ricalta watched an episode of Married with Children with her children and decided she'd seen enough. The specific episode she watched wasn't I'll See You in Court. It was a different installment, but what she saw inspired her to take action that would ripple through the entire television industry. She began writing letters. Lots of them. Targeted letters, sent directly to the companies whose advertisements appeared during Married with Children's broadcast, urging those companies to withdraw their support from a show she believed was harmful and indecent. What happened next surprised almost everyone. The campaign worked. Major advertisers, household names whose products reached tens of millions of American consumers, began pulling their advertising from the show. The story made national news. Ricalta gave interviews. Conservative commentators celebrated her as a defender of decency. The pressure on Fox escalated rapidly. Suddenly, a network that had been riding the controversy surrounding Married with Children as a kind of free advertising found itself genuinely on the back foot, scrambling to reassure the advertisers it desperately needed, while trying not to completely abandon the rebellious identity that made the show valuable in the first place. It was into this atmosphere that I'll See You in Court arrived, already filmed and sitting on the schedule. Fox executives looked at an episode built around secret recordings of intimate acts, a courtroom sequence full of explicit testimony, and the general spectacle of two couples having their private lives exposed without consent, and they made a calculation. Given the advertiser revolt, given the public pressure, given the scrutiny the network was already under, airing this particular episode at this particular moment felt like stepping into a fire that was already burning. The legal dimensions of the plot added another layer of anxiety. Unlike a crude joke which could be defended as harmless humor, an episode that centered on non-consensual filming and the subsequent use of that footage felt like it existed in territory where the network could face criticism not just for bad taste but for something that looked, in the wrong light, like endorsement. So Fox pulled the episode. Quietly, without announcement, without explanation. It simply disappeared from the broadcast schedule and was replaced by something else. The cast found out. The writers found out. And they were puzzled because from where they stood, they hadn't done anything that crossed a line they hadn't crossed before. Ed O'Neill, who played Al Bundy, would later reflect on the decision with genuine bafflement. This, after years of material that had seemed far more likely to draw the network's concern. Katie Sagal, who played Peg, reportedly found the episode funny and consistent with the show's voice. The writers felt that the network had made a decision driven by fear rather than by any honest assessment of the material itself. But decisions driven by fear don't always come with explanations. The episode vanished and life went on. For years afterward, I'll See You in Court existed primarily as a rumor. Fans who heard about it couldn't find it anywhere. Not in syndication packages, not in early DVD releases, not in any official episode guide that treated it as a real, completed installment of the series. Some people assumed it had never actually been finished. Others believed the only surviving copies had been destroyed. The truth was considerably stranger. The episode was completely intact. It had simply been deliberately excluded from every distribution package Fox and Sony put together. It was a ghost episode, confirmed by people who had worked on it, described in enough detail to prove it was real, but impossible for the general public to actually watch. This kind of absence has a way of building mythology. The less accessible something becomes, the more people want it. By the time the early internet was connecting Married with Children fans to each other in the late 1990s, the lost episode had taken on a near-legendary quality. Message boards accumulated threads full of people sharing second-hand accounts of what it supposedly contained. Some claimed to have seen it broadcast in Canada. Others said they'd caught it during an obscure overnight airing somewhere in the American Midwest. None of these claims were verifiable, and most of them were probably fabricated or confused. But the interest was absolutely real, and it kept growing. The first genuine public airing of the episode in the United States came in 2002, when FX, which had acquired the syndication rights to the full Married with Children catalog, quietly slipped the episode into a weekday afternoon rerun block without any advance notice or promotional push. There was no press release. No one sent out alerts. It simply appeared on the schedule, and the fans who caught it barely believed what they were seeing. Early internet forums lit up. People who had spent years hearing about this episode were suddenly watching it for the first time, and the general reaction was a mix of delight and genuine surprise that the reality of the episode was somehow both exactly what people had expected and subtly different from the mythology that had built up around it. The episode was funny. It was crude. It was classic Married with Children in almost every respect. But it was also, for viewers watching it 13 years after it was filmed, something that resonated in ways the 1989 audience might not have fully felt. The world had changed in the intervening years. The internet had arrived.